Right. So, the last technical lecture is on approximate and randomized algorithms. So, to cut a long story short, what we want to do here is to address this particular comment in red. That is, the task of finding the optimal solution may have high computational complexity, and therefore, what we want to do is we try to see whether we can get close to optimal or whether we can get the optimal with high probability. Right. The first question is whether we can approximate. The second question is, can we get a good randomized algorithm? Now, when we talk about randomization, it is not only this question. It may also be that the randomization or the probability is in the time domain. That is, I will always get the optimal solution, yes, but the expected time by which I will get the optimal solution will be order n. So, the complexity might be an expected time complexity, not the worst case time complexity. Like you know that if you choose the pivot in quicksort in a random way, then there is a way to prove that the expected runtime of quicksort will be n log n, right. Whereas in the worst case, it is n square. So, as I said that we are going to look at these two class of problems, and let us start with approximate algorithms. So, we start with a simple example, the example of load balancing. So, we are given a set of m identical machines and n jobs. Each job has a processing time, each job Tj has a processing, each job j has a processing time Tj. We assume that the jobs are not preemptible, that is, each job must run contiguously on one machine, and that each machine can process one job at a time, not more than one job at a time. And let us say that Ji refers to the subset of jobs assigned to machine I. Then the load of the machine I is given by the sum of the processing times of the jobs which have been assigned to that particular machine I. Now, different machines have different set of jobs assigned to it, and therefore, the total completion time of each of these machines can be different. And we want to find out that how early do we finish everything, and then that is defined by the max span, which is the max of all these loads, right. So, suppose we have these machines 1, 2, 3, etc., and these are the jobs which are assigned to the machines. Then the max of all three is this, and that is the max span. That is the time by which all the jobs are completed, right. Now, our problem is to assign the jobs to the different machines in such a way that the total max span is minimized, right. So, it is very easy to see from what Professor PPC discussed in his lecture that finding the optimal make span will be NP hard even if we have just 2 machines. Why? Remember the set partitioning problem? Given a set of numbers, can we split those numbers into 2 sets such that their sums are equal, right? Now here those numbers are the runtimes of these jobs, and I give you 2 processors. Now you can complete them in the best possible time if you can split them equally into 2 sets. So you ask, is there a solution which has make span of sigma of all these jobs by 2? You know? And then we see that finding that out is therefore a hard problem. Okay? So what did we do? We took subset that set partitioning where we are given these numbers A1 through N, and we want to find out whether I can split them, whether I can find a subset which has exactly this size, right? So if I am given an instance of this problem, I will say that these are my n jobs and their runtimes are these, A1 is T1 and so on, N is Tn, and then I ask that can I have a schedule where the make span is sigma of Ti by 2, right? So that shows that this is NP hard. Now let me skip through this for the timing. Yeah. What we are going to do is to look at a greedy approach. So what we do is, for each job we choose the least loaded machine Mk at every point of time. So it's a greedy algorithm. I pick up job 1, then job 2, then job 3 and job 4 and so on. So at a point when I have picked up job K, let's say one of the jobs, I find out that out of the machines that I have right now, which one is the least loaded, and I give that job to that machine, right? So as you can see that initially job 1 was given here, job 2 was given here, job 3 was given here. Then out of these 3, which was the least loaded? This one was least loaded, so job 4 was given here. Then after job 4 was given here, which was the least loaded? This one, third one. So J5 went here, and then J5 was here, J4 ends here. So now this one has the minimum, so J6 was given here. And then still then also this is minimum, so J7 is given here. Then out of these 3, this one is here, this one is here, this one is here. So this one has the minimum, so J8 goes here, then J9 goes here. Then this is the minimum, so J10 goes here, J11 goes here, and then this is still the minimum, so J12 goes here. Algorithm is clear, right? Very simple algorithm. Now we want to show that the make span that we obtain by this is better than twice optimal. It is not worse than twice optimal. If the total make span, the optimal make span is L star, then we are going to give a solution which is not worse than twice of L star, right. That is what we want to prove. That is the approximation that this will guarantee. So, you see, when we talk about approximate algorithms, the algorithm itself is just like any other algorithm, but then the main work is to show that the algorithm will guarantee a solution which is related to the optimal solution in some way. In this case, we are looking at what is called alpha approximation. That is, we want to say that whatever we give is within an alpha bound of the optimal solution, right. That is what we want to do. So, when I say that this guarantees twice optimal, so that means that it is not going to be more than twice the optimal sum for a minimization problem. So, now can you show that for this algorithm we are guaranteed to be twice optimal? That is, our solution by this algorithm will never be more than twice of L star, where L star is the optimal make span. Question is, how do we show it? That is the main activity for analyzing this approximate algorithm. So, now note one thing, the proof to this lies on a very key observation. When all the jobs have been assigned, look at the job which was assigned the last. In this case, the job that was assigned the last is J12. Now, when J12 was given to machine 3, it was given to machine 3. Before it was given, what can we tell about the load of machine 3 in comparison with the other two? It was the least among the 3. So, I know that at this point, before J12 was assigned, machine 3 had the minimum load, right. That means all of them had crossed this line, right. Now, does that help us in proving this? That it cannot be worse than twice optimal? So, let us look at these steps. Before the last job J was assigned to machine K, it had the smallest load. This is what we just now discussed. Before assignment of job J, Lk minus Tj was less than or equal to Li for all the other machines. For all the other machines, what is this Lk minus Ti? The load on machine K before the last job was assigned. That is Lk minus this Tj, right, where Tj is the last job. So, they are all less than or equal to Li. That is what this statement says. It had the smallest load. Now, if we sum over all the machines and then take sigma of Li by m, then this quantity will be less than or equal to this. Why so? Why so? because all of them were less than or equal to Li. This was less than or equal to Li, right? So, if we go back to this thing, let me draw that picture here so that it becomes clear. So, at the point of time that this job was not there, all of these were more than this, right. So, if I take the sum of all of these and divide it by the number of machines m, then the value that we will get is more than this blue line, because all of them are more than this blue line. So, if I take their average, that will be on the right side of this blue line, right. And what is my this Lk minus Tj? This is my Lk minus Tj, this. So, this is less than the average of all these three, right. So, we write Lk minus Tj is less than or equal to the average, that is 1 by m, where m is the number of processors Li, right. And I then claim that this figure is less than or equal to L star. Why? Because this is saying that take the sum of all the times of the jobs, divide it by m. If you could divide them equally among all the machines exactly, then you would get this figure. Then you would get this figure. But if it is not exactly divisible into m equal subsets, then it will be less than or equal to L star. It will be less than L star then, but it can certainly not be better than L star, right. So, now you see what have we here? We have Lk equal to Lk minus Tj plus Tj. This is nothing but algebra, just adding and subtracting Tj. Now, we have shown that Lk minus Tj is L star from here. So, that is what we are using here. And Tj is of course less than or equal to L star. Why? Because the make span cannot be less than Tj. It cannot be less than any particular job size. So, therefore, this is less than or equal to L star plus L star, and therefore, Lk is less than or equal to twice of L star. So, we have shown that the minimum optimal solution, if that is L star, then our algorithm gives me a make span which is less than or equal to twice of L star. So, we have a two approximation algorithm for this problem. Now, please let me know whether there are any questions on this part. No. Now we come to another hard problem, traveling salesperson problem. And we want to say that can we find an algorithm which may not give me optimal, but is guaranteed to give me a tour which is less than twice optimal or thrice optimal or 4 times optimal, right. We want to find out, can we have such an algorithm? Why do I want to do that? Because I know that to solve it optimally, I will have to spend a lot of time, because there is no known polynomial time algorithm for this problem. But if I have an algorithm which works really quickly in polynomial time, let us say, and gives me a solution which is some alpha times optimal, then I might be happy with it, because I may not really want the most optimal tour, may be happy with a suboptimal solution. See, in reality, for many real world problems, we do not really care about the most optimal one, right. I mean, you may not really care about finding out the least cost tour. I mean, least cost tours usually, it takes you to an airport at 2 o'clock in the night, your next flight is at 12 noon, then again, flight times are always adjusted to the convenience of mail. Wherever mail comes in, that is the time your flight will take off. So, optimal cost, is something which is a good thing, but theoretically not always desirable. So, you may actually be fine with a suboptimal solution, but we would like to at the same time guarantee that it is within some bounds of the optimal, so that it does not go haywire. So, there is this nice approximation algorithm for this, which does the following thing. We will first describe the algorithm, then we will see how to show that it is twice or within some k times of optimal. What you do is you construct a minimum spanning tree of the graph. So, you have the graph, construct a minimum spanning tree of the graph, right. That we can do in polynomial time, we know MST works in polynomial time, right. Now, if I did a traversal of the minimum spanning tree, then I am touching all the cities. I do a depth first traversal on the minimum spanning tree. So, I will visit all the vertices, but will you agree that that is a proper tour of the traveling salesperson problem? Why not? Huh? Yeah, but the depth first traversal will finally end up with back at the starting point, right. You will finally in the last path you will backtrack and go back to your this thing. So, what I am saying is that if you have a spanning tree, let me draw one here. Suppose you get a spanning tree like this. Right. Now, these are my cities. Let me name them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Now, let's do a DFS on this. So, I start from 1, then I go to 2, then I go to 3, then I go to 4, then I backtrack to 3, then go to 5, right, then backtrack to 3, then to 2, then to 1, then 6, then 8, then 9, then back to 8, then 10, then back to 8, then back to 6, back then to 7, then back to 6, back to 1. Nice. So we have actually touched all the cities and we are back at city 1. Now, are you happy with this tour? Why not? Because we are not allowed to visit the same city twice, right? It has to be a Hamiltonian cycle. We cannot visit the same city twice. So what we will do is, expensive or not will come to. We don't know, may not be expensive, but we'll see. Now let's see how we can actually convert this into a proper tour. Optimal or not we will see later, but this is what we will do. So whenever we see a revisited vertex, we will not revisit it. So let's see, I am going to go from 1 to 2, right? 2 to 3, then 3 to 4. Now in this, it is saying that go from 4 to 3. I said, but I already have visited 3, so I will not do that. Then which is the next one to go to? 5. So I say that let me take the direct flight to 5. Why go back to 3? Take direct flight to 5. Okay. Now 5 to 3 I will not go, it's already visited. 3 to 2 I will not go, 2 to 1 I will not go. Which is the next new node? 6. So from 5 I will fly directly to 6, right? Then 6 to 8, 8 to 9, then 9 to 8 I will not go, but I will go from 9 to 10. Remember that this is a spanning tree is the subgraph of a complete graph, because in a minimum, in the TSP problem we can go from any vertex to any vertex. And then from 10 we go to 7, right? And from 7 we go back to 1. So this is now my tour. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 9, 10, 7, 1. Now you are happy with this tour, right? So it's a tour, proper tour, right? Now I want to see whether this tour is going to get me anywhere close to the optimal or not, right? Now the TSP comes in two important variants. One is called an Euclidean TSP, the other is a non-Euclidean TSP. What is Euclidean TSP? That it has to follow the triangle inequality. That is, distance from A to B plus B to C will be more than A to C, right? Does not always happen with flight costs, right? It might be that when you go from Kolkata to Pune, if you go via Ahmedabad, it might be cheaper than taking a direct flight. Now, if you take a non-metric TSP, that is a non-Euclidean TSP, what can we say about approximation? Can we say that give me an algorithm which is going to give me k times the optimal? See, there is a problem here, there is a hidden problem here which we have to see. Take the Hamiltonian cycle problem. Problem of finding out whether in a graph I have a Hamiltonian cycle. I convert this to a TSP problem in the following way, that for all the edges that are there in the graph, I put a cost of 1. But the graph is not necessarily a complete graph, right? So what I do is I add the other edges and put a cost of infinity on them. Now, if the Hamiltonian cycle exists, then there will be some Hamiltonian cycle and the cost of that cycle will be what? N. But if the Hamiltonian cycle does not exist, what will be the minimum cost tour of the traveling salesperson? Infinite. Now, if you had some approximation method of saying that can you get me in polynomial time k times optimal. Suppose such an algorithm had been there and you just need to check whether that k times optimal is finite or infinite, and then you can predict whether that graph has a Hamiltonian cycle or not, right? Is it, did I lose you? No, so what I am trying to tell you here is that for the non-Euclidean version of the TSP, approximation may not be possible, because if you could approximate in polynomial time, you could decide a NP-complete problem in polynomial time. If you could have an algorithm which is giving you k times optimal for this version of TSP, then use that algorithm on this modified version of the problem. So, what we do, take the Hamiltonian cycle problem, take the graph on which we want to solve the Hamiltonian cycle problem. Suppose this is my graph on which I want to find out whether there is a Hamiltonian cycle or not, right? What I do here is I give a cost of 1 to each of these edges, and then give a cost of infinity to all the edges which are not here. So, for example, in this graph this edge was not there, so I put it there and put a cost of infinity. This edge was not there, I put a cost of infinity. So, I add all these edges which were not there and put a cost of infinity. Now, the resulting graph is a complete graph. Everybody is connected to everybody. Two nodes are either connected with an edge of weight 1 or with the weight of edge infinity. Now, suppose I had an algorithm which for any TSP problem can give me a solution within say 5 times of optimal. Then I will apply it on this graph and check whatever value I got. So, I know that it can give me a solution within 5 times of optimal. Now, suppose it returns me a value of 345. Then I will say that then the Hamiltonian cycle exists, because if the Hamiltonian cycle did not exist, then the minimum cost would be infinity, right? And 5 times infinity is infinity. So, if it has given me 345 which is finite, then a Hamiltonian cycle exists, right? So, I am being able to decide whether a Hamiltonian cycle exists or not if I can have an approximate algorithm for the TSP, general TSP. So, now please try to understand. Now, this is reduction, but reduction which is showing me that I cannot hope to have even an approximate solution for that, right? I cannot have any k times optimal solution given by a polynomial time algorithm for general TSP. That is what this seems to say. But now, let us look at the metric version, and then of course, at the end I will leave it to you to ask you that what exactly does the metric version have, so that all these argument that I made does not hold there. And I can actually have a nice approximate algorithm for the metric version. So, what is the difference? What is the property of the metric version which makes it amenable for having a polynomial time approximation? And what is my approximation algorithm? The approximation algorithm is the one that I described just now, that I will find out a minimum spanning tree, and then I will traverse that spanning tree in this way, that is, I will create a tour out of the spanning tree, where whenever I am repeating vertices, I will not actually go to those vertices, I will go to the next new vertex and thereby get a tour like this. So, is the algorithm clear? Given an instance of TSP, I first construct a minimum spanning tree and then traverse that spanning tree in this way, right. So, I do a DFS and only list out the new vertices that I visit in that order. And then I claim that the tour that I get by this one is within twice of the optimal. That is, if the optimal cost is C, then this cost will be less than or equal to twice of C. Right? How? So, if I remove any edge of the TSP tour, then I get a spanning tree of the graph. Think of the optimal tour. Think of the optimal tour. If I remove an edge of that tour, that is also a spanning tree, right? That is also a spanning tree. It's a spanning tree where there are no branches. No, it just every node has just one successor. But that is also a spanning tree, right? And the cost of the minimum spanning tree is less than or equal to that spanning tree. See, now you see we have come very close to optimal. Minimum spanning tree is not that bad anymore, right? But I am having to traverse the minimum spanning tree where every edge is traversed twice. Not actually. I am not traversing these edges twice. I am traversing, so had I traversed these edges back as in DFS, repeating vertices as is shown in this tour, what have I done? I have replaced these edges through which I would have backtracked and gone to 6 by this single edge. Here is where the metric thing comes in, that the cost of these together will be more than the cost of this one, because it is the Euclidean version, right. Okay. So, the direct path from 5 to 6 is always has lesser cost than going from 5 to 3 to 2 to 1 and then 6. So, therefore, if I use these shortcuts like I have done, the cost of what I get is less than twice the cost of MST, right. Now, we put these things together. We say that cost of TSP tour is greater than cost of T, which is greater than cost of MST, right? Then we use this approximation, and from there we get cost of MST2 is equal to twice of cost T, which is greater than or equal to twice of cost of MST. Right? So, you see simple algorithm, but then it guarantees us a solution which is not worse than twice of the optimal cost. There were other algorithms, but we should split it equally between approximate and randomize. So, we have approximated, now we will randomize. Right? This is just giving you a glimpse of the style of these algorithms. I mean, surely if you take up any books, then it will have a lot more algorithms and of larger variety. So, the first thing that we need to understand about randomized algorithms is the following. See, for these combinatorial problems, our problem is that we do not know among the choices that are available which one to choose. Right? So, we can try out some, backtrack, try out other things, which is what we do in branch and bound. Right? Within branch and bound, if we find common subproblems, we can solve them, store their solution, or what we call memoize them, and then when we hit up on the same common solution, we reuse that. That is what we will have when we do dynamic programming, all branch and bound with memoization, and so on and so forth. Now, what we are saying here is that instead of making deterministic choices like that, we make random choices. And then we ask that why will random choice help us? Right? I mean, if there is a random way to do things well, why cannot I also have a deterministic way of doing things well? Yes? No, now you are speaking like a mathematician. You are saying that statistically I will be doing well, right? But I am trying to understand physically where am I gaining on this? Yes? Yeah, so this is a very deep question. You see, so there are several answers to this. Now, the first one is that we can offset worst case scenarios, which is what you were saying. So, therefore, when you compute the expected time complexity or the expected quality of solution, statistically it looks good. The second thing is that the randomized algorithm might actually be a very simple algorithm, much more simpler than your deterministically very good algorithm. Now, please try to understand this. I may have an algorithm which gives me the optimal solution using that algorithm, but it might be a very difficult thing to code. Like, take for example, finding the kth smallest element or the kth largest element in an array of numbers. Right? We know that algorithm which is given there in Cormen, dividing things in a very peculiar way and then doing that, right? Now, if somebody came and told you that, look, all that is fine, but here is an algorithm which you can implement in 2 lines, and 99.99% of the time it will give you the kth minimum, right? And if you apply this algorithm twice or thrice, that 99.99% will become 99.999999 10 times problem. So, So then you are tempted that why do I actually go and do that when, for all practical purposes, if I run it twice or thrice, the chances that I actually get the kth smallest number is very large. Right? So that is the motivation. The motivation is simplicity, conceptual elegance, and then a provable expectation of getting the desired solution within a very short period of time. The third point is actually more deeper. So the randomization may actually come because of the modeling of natural phenomena like concurrency. There are several different processes running. In what order they will run, we don't know, right? We want to model it so that we don't actually deterministically leave out certain scenarios. We want to say that every possible real world scenario will occur with non-zero probability. Then we use randomization. So when, for example, you are modeling some process, then you run it with random inputs. Why random inputs? Because you want to make sure that every input has a non-zero probability of being used. So you can go back to your boss and say that, look, I have checked it randomly for so much of time, and therefore the probability that a specific input was used is so much. So that is another reason why we may want to look at randomization. Okay. There are a few problems here. Let me start with this problem first, and then I'll come back to a slightly more involved one. I am not going to do all this. This I want to do first because we were discussing this, that I want to find out the kth largest element in S, right? Now the algorithm is very simple. You choose a splitter, that is some ai belonging to S, where S is a list of numbers. You choose any of these elements, and then what you do is for each element aj of S, put aj in S minus if it is less than the chosen element, put aj in S plus if they are greater than the chosen element. That is what we do in every iteration of quicksort, right? We choose a splitter, then move all the elements which are lesser than this to one set, move all the elements which are greater than that in the other set, right? Now, if I find that the number of elements is in S minus is equal to k minus 1, then my ai is the kth largest element, right? Then it is the kth largest element. If I find that the number of elements in S minus is greater than k, then where does the kth largest element lie? On the left side, on S minus or in S plus? S minus, right? And then what I do is I recursively call select from S minus the kth largest element, because then the kth largest element of S minus is my kth largest element of the whole array. Otherwise, if we find that the size of S minus is less than or equal to k, then the kth largest element lies in the other set, that is, it lies in S plus. But in that S plus, which th element will it be? K minus 1 minus q. Why? Because q is the number of elements in S minus, they are all less than this. So out of the remaining elements, out of the remaining k minus q, out of the remaining elements, the k minus 1 minus qth element is the one which is the kth largest element of the whole set, right. Now, tell me one thing, is this algorithm which is recursive, will it always give me the kth largest element? This algorithm, will it always find the kth largest element? It is very simple, right. What we are doing is, we are choosing any element and then counting the number of elements which is lesser than this, putting them in one set, finding the number of elements which are greater than that, putting that in the other set, right. Now, I see that I am looking for the kth largest element. If this side has more than k elements, then the kth largest element is on this side, right. And therefore, I look for the kth largest element recursively on this set. On the other hand, if I find that this has fewer than k elements, suppose it has q elements, then q elements are already on this side. So, k minus q minus 1 elements I have to skip here, and therefore, I need the k minus 1 minus qth element on the right set, right. That is the kth largest element of the whole, and I recursively keep on doing this. So, this algorithm will find the kth largest element always, yes or no? Many of you are looking to be as if in serious detention. See, in school, when we had detention, we used to be posted outside the class. These days, the rules have changed. Detention is inside the class. People would be very happy to be outside the class.
See, if we change our splitter element, if that AI is belonging to S, then it may not. But if we take AI from S plus or S minus.
Now, initially the AI may not be the kth largest element.
No, but later on we have AI we are selecting from S or S plus and S minus.
Oh, when I recursively call it, then you see this S plus will become the S of the recursive call, right? That is parameter passing. Yeah. So, it will always find the kth, yes. There is no probability as far as finding the kth largest element is concerned. This is a clean recursive algorithm for finding the kth largest element, right. So, it will always find the kth largest element, right. Now, you might wonder, why am I then talking about this in the randomized algorithms lecture? See, this algorithm will always find the kth largest element. What we want to find out is what is the expected time complexity of this, right. So, I want to say that this is an algorithm which will find the kth largest element within certain bounds of the time complexity. That is where I want to show this. This is a randomized algorithm. Why? Why is this a randomized algorithm? Because I am choosing the pivot element is being chosen randomly. Now, we shall prove that the expected running time of this algorithm is order n. Now, that is nice, right? Because that terrible algorithm that you see, running into a few pages also gives you select in order n time. But this is a much simpler recursive algorithm, right? So now let's see how we are going to establish that. Now we first define what is called a central element. This is a definition that we are putting in. We will say that an element of a set will be central, it will be called central, if at least a quarter of the elements are smaller than it. So this is a quarter of the elements which are smaller than it, and at least a quarter of the elements are larger than it. So these, right? How much is remaining? 50%, right? So if I look at the array, then 50% of the element in the set, 50% of the element are central elements. Because you see, only any element in this region, any element, now don't please assume that we are sorting the array. I am just saying that suppose you looked at the elements in order of their values, suppose we are not actually sorting them. Then you see, if you pick any element and find that 25% of them are smaller, that is here, and 25% of them are larger, then how many elements qualify to be in this set of central elements? 50% of them, right? So if I randomly choose my pivot, what is the probability that it will be a central element? Half, right? The probability is 0.5 that I will choose, that the pivot that I have chosen randomly is a central element, right? 50% probability. Now we talk about this particular point. If a central element is chosen as the splitter, then in the recursion, at least a quarter of the set will be thrown away. Right? Okay? Why? Because how did we define the algorithm? The algorithm said that the elements which are smaller than it are in S minus, the ones which are larger than it are in S plus, right? Now that tells us that S minus has quarter of the elements at least, S plus has quarter of the elements, because by definition for a central element 25% at least are smaller than it, 25% are larger than it. Now I will either throw away S minus or I will throw away S plus, because the recursion is taking one of these, right? In this case it is taking S minus, here it is taking S plus. So my claim is that I am throwing away at least 1/4 in every iteration, right? And now I say that the algorithm is in phase J when the size of the set under consideration is at most three by 4 to the power j into n. Now what does that mean? Every time I throw a quarter away, how much remains? 3 by 4. So at the end of the phase, I am left with 3 by 4. At the end of the next phase, I am left with 3 by 4 of the original 3 by 4. So 3 by 4 times 3 by 4 times 3 by 4. Now think of the algorithm in phases. In each phase, I am keeping 3/4 of the original elements. So 3/4 of n, then 3/4 of 3/4 of n, then 3/4 of 3/4 of 3/4 of n, right? Now to finish off the complexity analysis, I need to only decide two things. How many iterations do I need to move from one phase to another? And then how many phases do I need? Right? So now the probability that the algorithm chooses a central element as a splitter is half. So, I can say that the expected number of iterations by which I choose a central splitter is 2, because the probability of a randomly chosen splitter being a central element is half. So, in 2 iterations I am expected to pick up a central element. Whenever I pick up a central element, I move to the next phase, right. So, therefore, I can now say that the total number of steps that I need is the number of steps in phase 0 plus number of steps in phase 1 plus number of steps in phase 2 and so on, right. Now, how many elements do I have in the first phase? All n of them. In the second phase, n 3 by 4. In the third phase, n 3 by 4 square, right. There is a number of elements. And what do? I scan the elements and see whether they are lesser or bigger and put them in 2 sets. So, the number of operations is some constant times this number for each phase, and then each phase is repeated twice, which is why I have this 2, right. In 2 iterations, I will be getting into the next phase on an average. So, then if we sum this up over all k, then this becomes a GP series and we get HCN. So, cutting the mathematics out of this, what this tells us is that this simple algorithm by which you recursively find the kth largest element is expected to finish off in approximately order of n number of iterations, that is HCN is order of n, right. So, you have a randomized order of n algorithm for finding the kth largest element. Any questions?
So, finding a deterministic algorithm for finding median, it also runs in order of n time.
Yes.
Then what kind of improvement we are getting over?
So, that algorithm, as we discussed, is conceptually more complicated than what we are discussing here. This is a very simple recursive algorithm. It shows that a simple randomized recursive algorithm can give you performance which is expected to be as good as the deterministic one, right. No more questions? If you don't ask me more questions, I will keep on teaching. This is one which is also a problem which is conceptually quite simple. You know how the Ethernet LAN works? That how do you, there is a bus where you have lot of nodes sitting on that, right? Each of them can start transmitting on the bus at any point of time. If 2 of them start transmitting at the same time, we have what is called a collision, right? How does it resolve collision? Yes, what does CSMACD do? So, there is a mechanism to detect whether the collision has taken place. But when a sender detects a collision, what will it do? Will it try to send it in the next cycle? it waits for a random amount of time. How much amount of time should it wait? Huh? Why?
And then it sends based
So I am asking you, what is that logic?
It is 2 raised to k minus 1.
Yes,
0
why?
to 2 raised to k.
Yes, why? What is k?
K is number of reattempts that has been made after failure attempt.
So this is the problem that we are looking at. There is a common resource, in this case the bus, right? There are set of processes P1 through Pn which wants to access that resource. These are the senders, right? And they, if two people try at the same time, nobody is allowed. There is a collision. Now I want to figure out that each process, what should be the probability with which it tries to write or tries to access that resource every time, right? Now the important thing to understand is there is a probability distribution behind this whole thing. And all types of accesses are not of the same thing. Like for example, when we talk about arrival of different events on a queuing system, we often use what is called a Poisson arrival process, right? Poisson, P-O-I-S-S-O-N. Or we say that the inter-arrival times are distributed according to an exponential distribution, right? Now, but when we talk about telephone calls, we sometimes use a distribution called L-Lang-D. Why? Because there is a tendency that when people don't get the connection, they try again immediately, right? But that is not the same pattern when people come to a shopping market, for example. They can come in any pattern and one does not depend on the other, right? Now, suppose we don't know anything about this distribution. We don't know anything about how they are going to try to access. We just want to set some protocol by which they will try to access the database, and we want to make sure that each of them is not starved. That is, they will get access to the shared resource at some point of time, and we want to make sure that the time within which everyone is guaranteed to get access to the resource with certain probability is minimized. So let's first see some analysis. Suppose we say that the event Pk, suppose we say that AKT, this AKT is the event that Pk attempts to access the database in round T. So K is the process number, T is the time. So you have times 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 up to infinity, and AKT is the event that the process K tries to access that resource in time T, right? So suppose we say that the probability of AKT occurring is P. That is, the probability that process P, that process K tries to access the resource at time T is P. Then what is the probability that it does not try to access the resource at time T? 1 minus P, right? So this is understood. Now we say SKT is the event that Pk succeeds in accessing the database in round T. When will it succeed? When it tries and no one else tries, right? When it tries and no one else tries. So, the probability that it tries is this, and the probability that no one else tries is this, right, where this is the product of all these terms. Right? So, this is the probability. This is the probability that it succeeds in accessing the database in round T. Now, this function is maximized for p equal to 1 by n. Now, we are not going into the mathematics of that. You can show that this probability that pk succeeds in accessing the database in round T is maximized when p is equal to 1 by n. So, if I substitute that here, then I get the probability SKT equal to this. And again, through some analysis, you can show that this is theta of 1 by n. What is the theta? Asymptotic notation theta? It is both upper bounded and lower bounded by that, right, by 1 by n. Now, tell me, is this a good probability? The issue with this is that as the number of processes increase, the probability that you succeed is going to go further and further down, because it is 1 by n. So, I ask that suppose what is the probability that it succeeds in T rounds? In T rounds, what is the probability that it succeeds? So, I define FKT, that event Pk. What is the event Pk? That the kth process tries to access the resource. It does not succeed in any of the rounds 1 through T. So, that probability is what? If this is the probability that it succeeds in round T, then the probability that it does not succeed in a round is 1 minus that, and then it does not succeed in any of the rounds from 1 through T is that to the power of T. It does not succeed in this first round, that probability times it does not succeed in the second round, that probability. This is school book probability, right? And then again, using some mathematics, we can show that this is now 1 minus 1 by En to the power of T, right? And then this is some justification for that. We are not going into that. Now, tell me, how good or bad is this? This 1 minus 1 by En to the power of T. So, if we choose this value of T, that is the number of rounds T, to be En, where E is E, then we get this is to be equal to 1 by E, now which is independent of n. What does this tell us? That if you execute this protocol for En number of rounds, then the probability drops down to 1 by E, which is now a constant, which is independent of n, but the number of rounds is now proportionate to n, because we will run it for so many rounds, right? And thereafter, if we choose a slightly larger T For example, if we choose t equal to En times some c log n, then the probability sharply goes down. Now the probability that you will fail in t rounds is n to the power of minus c, which is a very small quantity now. So what does this tell us? Tells us that there are these randomized algorithms which, if you run it once, it may not guarantee you a quality of solution which is good enough. But if you repeat it a few number of times, then the probability of your failure is going to reduce with each round. And now, like we study the growth of complexity with the number of iterations, here it is the how does it behave as you repeat the number of iterations. So, for some problems, if you repeat a randomized algorithm k number of times, the probability of success might go up exponentially. In some problems, if you apply it k number of times, the probability of success may grow linearly, right. So, that is what we consider. That is another thing that we need to consider when we are looking at randomized algorithms. Done. Thank you for your attention.